Hello there and welcome to this special broadcast of the CDP Europe Awards 2022. Now for Nature here on Euronews. Once a year, CDP, the non-profit that runs the environmental transparency system, puts the spotlight on the companies, cities and investors leading the way to reach a net zero, nature-positive economy. For more on this, I'm joined now by Max Field-Weiss, the Executive Director of CDP Europe. Good to see you there. Now, I must say the climate crisis has been making the headlines a lot in the past year, but nature hasn't. Is that why your big message today is now for nature?
Well, hi, Maeve. Look, when it comes to our climate crisis, we must limit warming to 1.5 degrees because climate and nature, we need to see them as two sides of the same coin, because nature, it's the source of everything that we as humans rely upon to survive. And that's exactly why we need a massive rethink of our economies, as well as our financial markets and our cities. It's really our only choice. So we at CDP, we run the world's environmental disclosure system, and our awards today are for those few companies, cities, as well as investors that we see already walking the talk. They're driving us to a truly sustainable economy that works for both people and planet. And that's why it's now for nature.
Okay, let's hear what's at stake. Europe is an example. So says the EU Green Deal chief Frans Timmermans, who we'll be hearing from later on in the programme. But, as he says, Europe cannot do it alone. Let's check in now then with one woman leading international efforts on nature, Elisabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you so much for joining us. First question, Executive Secretary Mrema, remind us why 2030 is such a crucial date for reaching net nature positivity.
What is at stake is the loss of biodiversity reaching unprecedented rates in the history of humankind. The climate change COP Glasgow last year clearly showed the connection between climate change and biodiversity loss. Never in the history of the conferences of the parties of the climate change has nature biodiversity being discussed at a high magnitude, as was the case in Glasgow. And this then has built momentum for the post-2020 framework. And actually, we are looking at this framework as a Paris Agreement for biodiversity and nature, and a specific target on climate change that the framework will support the implementation of the Paris Agreement is there already in the draft.
Now, politically, climate and nature are still separate, with less attention on nature. Why? And do you think the adoption of the new framework incoming could help?
So we need to see a better integration of nature and climate change in decision-making on an equal footing at national level. That is one. We also need to see governments to really take ambitious and bold targets with clear timelines on redirecting subsidies, because the subsidies, particularly if we look at fossil fuel, when we talk of energy, we need this to be redirected into nature positive outcomes, away from nature negative.
As you say, there's no time to waste.
No time to waste. Scientists have told us we either take action now or perish. And the perishing is you and me, all of us. Because if the economy fails, there are no jobs, there's no food, there's no air we breathe, clean air we breathe, the water we drink, then there's no life. And if there's no life, then we've perished. What will we leave to our children and our grandchildren? A clean planet or a degraded planet? And the responsibility is us, the parents, the leaders of today.
Now, how do we transform the way humans treat the natural world and make our economic system fit for purpose? To look at the science and economics behind our debate today, I'm delighted now to bring in Dr. Johan Rockström, Director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Sir Partha Dasgupta of the University of Cambridge, and Hans Brunich, the European Environment Agency's Executive Director. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. My first question will be to Dr. Rockström. Now, we know that our planet is already reaching tipping point. How does this threaten the 1.5 goal? And why must climate and nature be seen as one, Dr. Rockström?
We have, just over the last 5 years, made such significant advancements in our understanding that the climate system is on Earth, to a large extent, regulated not only by our fossil fuel burning, but also by biosphere systems that help us in absorbing and dampening the disturbance caused by our fossil fuel burning. So you have the Amazon rainforest, the oceans, the ice sheets, the permafrost, the grasslands, the wetlands, absorbing and dampening and cooling. So we have more and more scientific support that the only way to hold the 1.5 degrees Celsius line, to keep global warming well below 2 and land at 1.5, requires not only to phase out fossil fuels and reach a net zero world economy by 2050 in only less than 30 years' time, but we also need to become really sustainable stewards of all the ecosystems on Earth, because they help us in holding carbon, in absorbing carbon and cooling the planet.
A question now for Sir Dasgupta on really what is at stake now and how extreme the risks are posed by the decline in biodiversity.
As Dr. Rockström has just pointed out, the demand we are making on the biosphere's goods and services vastly exceeds the biosphere's capacity to supply them on a sustainable basis, okay? Some crude calculations suggest that the ratio is about 1.6, which we get the metaphor that we need 1.6 Earths to satisfy our needs. Now, that's not going to happen. There aren't 1.6 Earths. So we have to either decrease demand or help to rejuvenate the biosphere by allowing it to supply more, because we have trashed the biosphere enormously, all the ecosystems that Dr. Rockström has just pointed out to, okay? And most important, before I conclude, one shouldn't think that the tipping points are just lying in the future. Local communities have faced exhaustion of their local resources. Otherwise, you can't explain these distress migration that takes place from one region to another, and where they're not welcome because the people who are trying to be hosts are also very poor. So this has happened.
OK, well, let's get the view from Brussels and bring in Mr. Hans Brunich and ask you, what actions when it comes to nature do Europeans need to prioritise?
Well, I think in the last 2 years, Europe has put forward a really important package of priorities in addressing these issues. The European Green Deal brings together a lot of the elements that were referred to by the colleagues Rockström and Dasgupta in the European Green Deal, where indeed one makes the connection between biodiversity, between climate change and resource use, and also looks, I would say, at the fundamental underpinnings of going to a sustainable system, and that is addressing the key economic drivers of unsustainability: the energy system, the food system, the mobility system, the built environment. So by addressing the fundamental unsustainability of these systems, I think we are at least carving out the pathways, the trajectories that are needed. So the priorities are out there. I think the difficulty is now translating this in what I would call bending the trend dynamics, because the trends over the last 40, 50 years in all of these issues have been negative, and it's not enough to slow them down. We now really need to bend the trends, and that will require deep transitions in the core systems of the European and the global economy.
And Dr. Rockström, with COVID, for example, with the pandemic, we've seen that politics can react boldly to crises when they want. So thinking outside the box, what policies would bring us in line with our planet's boundaries?
It's so good that you connect this dialogue to the COVID crisis, because we are in the midst of a climate crisis, we're in the midst of an ecological crisis, and we're putting the livability on Earth for all future generations at risk. And we're just exiting, and we're not able to react at scale and speed in line with the severity of the crisis. I would like us to look at the COVID crisis and act, at least, but preferably a factor 10 more actively to solve the climate crisis. I think we're talking, as you have put forward, Partha, in your review, strong sustainability measures meaning serious policy decisions.
Well, we've heard from the scientists, so it's time now to bring in the cities and meet two of Europe's most ambitious mayors. We can bring in now Dario Nardella, the mayor of Florence, and Raymond Johansson, governing mayor of Oslo. Welcome to you both to the CDP Europe Awards 2022.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask you both, have you considered how much your city relies on nature and biodiversity, and if this has driven action or not?
Yes, so Florence has decided long ago to be a zero-volume city, improving the quality of our estate and spaces without losing additional natural space. Now, thanks also to the partnership with the private sector and crowdfunding, and we are planting a lot of trees in the urban area and creating urban gardens with green trees and fresh fruit for the benefits of our citizens, because we have to protect our environment. That's because we have a big project for next 10 years. We want to plant 1 million trees in the whole metropolitan area.
And Mr. Johansson, has your city been assessing the so-called co-benefits of climate action, like the positive impacts on health, the cost of living and well-being? Is that something that you and your team there are working on?
Yeah, it's a very important issue. The green shift needs to be fair. And the whole climate discussion can not just be a middle-class project. We need to take into account that all the people needs to see that it's beneficiary for them to be a part of the green shift. And that's a challenge, but we will not win if we're not able to get all people on board. Then we will not be able to win elections on a green ticket if there's so polarized the whole discussion.
Raymond Johansson, the governing mayor of Oslo, thank you so much for your time. And Dario Nardella, the mayor of Florence, thank you so much. Now from the City Hall to the boardroom, where European companies are rapidly setting ambitious targets. But what about delivery? Joining me to debate turning targets to transformation are Francesco Sorazzi, CEO of the Italian green supermajor Enel, Gilbert Gustein, the CEO of the Swiss fragrance and flavour company Firmenich, and Jürgen Esser, Chief Financial Officer at Danone. Lovely to see you all. What are your specific nature-based goals and how are you measuring them? Let's kick off first with Francesco.
First of all, let's say that we are part of this big alliance, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is something that has, let's say, it's the sister of the IPCC when you talk about climate. It's a convention in which we set together with many other entities and companies targets that deal with biodiversity and nature preservation under a certain, hierarchy, which is basically avoid, minimize, restore, and offset. These goals are those that guide us developing our work. And actually, we have today more than 180 projects in all the world that have to do with mitigating and restoring biodiversity in certain parts of the world.
And Jürgen, you of course are also working with science-based targets as well. But what about science-based targets for nature specifically? What are you looking to target, Jürgen?
Yeah, look, as a food company, healthy food needs healthy nature. And therefore, what we are doing is we are really trying to integrate our nature targets into our targets for climate. This is very complex and very multidimensional because nature is complex. But we have been piloting, for example, with our Alpro brand since year 2018, how to define nature targets and how to integrate them into our climate targets. And this has been a very successful pilot for us. And this is now what we are working on with the initiative for science-based targets for nature in order to articulate that journey.
And what about you? Same question to you, Gilbert. What is Firmenich up to?
Nature is the base, and we have set ourselves science-based targets to limit global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees in line with the Paris Agreement. And since then, we have been acting on these measures every single day. And also on top of this, on top of the actions that we're taking every day with the way we engage with farmers across the world, from Madagascar and vanilla, to vetiver in Haiti, because at the end of the day, we source 450 botanicals from all over the world. And why is nature critical? Just to give you an example, you need 3.5 tons of petal roses to produce 1 kilo of essential oil that we use in your perfumes and in your shampoos. So that's why nature is the base, and we needed to harvest it in a very responsible way, and this is why regenerative agriculture is key.
Are you optimistic that we will achieve a net zero nature positive global economy by 2050? Francesco?
Yes, I think we will reach a net zero. The only question is how big this net word is vis-a-vis the zero word. And I think the lowest net is the best solution. So fight for zero and then put the net at the end.
I'm 100% convinced that we are on the right way. I mean, today, 90% of the global economy have committed to net zero. That's great. Now we need to go from commitment to action, which means setting targets, measure achievement, and raising the bar. When you see what we have done in Danone, I mean, already in 2015, we have committed to net zero. In 2019, we have peaked the absolute emission of CO2. And since then, we are decreasing year on year. And 2021, and we have just published our results, we have been decreasing by almost 4% our CO2 emission. And guess what? A lot of it contributed to regenerative agriculture.
And the same question to Gilbert.
I am an eternal optimist, and I am definitely optimistic that we will hit these targets. Awareness is there. Everyone is raising up to the challenge. There are technologies that are available today that are helping us, accelerate this process. And I know, based on the information I have and the engagement that we have with suppliers, that are many technologies that are in the making that can help us also turbocharge against this target. So this target is on site. We are committed, and we are delivering. We will be delivering against our goals.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the three of you. Thank you so much for joining us here at the CDP Europe Awards 2022. Well, I'm joined now by two of the companies scoring a AAA with CDP in 2021. That is, the best CDP score for their climate change, forests and water security performance. Did you know there's just 14 companies in the world with that status and just 6 here in Europe? So Mika Jokio, the CEO of the Finnish pulp and paper business Metsä Board Corporation, great to see you there. And Robert van der Kerkhoff, a member of the managing board of the Austrian fibre company Lenzing. Thank you so much for joining us both. Robert, let's start with you. Can you tell us first, how does it feel to have this AAA rating and be the best pupil in the class?
It feels great. I think it's a long journey to get here. When we started a couple of years ago with our sustainability strategy, it was very difficult to judge what kind of work, what kind of investments are needed in order to really improve. So you start a journey, and then when you're on the journey, you're sometimes thinking, did we do the right thing? Do we get return on certain investments we need to make? But then in the end, if you get this AAA rating, the team is so incredibly proud and confident what they have achieved to be recognized as a leader. And if you consider that Lenzing is operating in one of the most polluting industries, the fashion industries, to get recognized for the leadership is something that every individual employee around the world is very proud of.
Okay, and I would address the same question to Mr. Jokio.
Yeah, I find it very, very important that our fresh fiber paperboards have a low environmental footprint. And by having that, then helping our customers to reduce their footprint of their products and value chain. And it's important that our resource-efficient recyclable products support the circular economy and, which is very important, offer alternatives to fossil-based materials, for example, plastics. I believe that these topics will be very high on the agenda of brand owners, retailers, and consumers.
Now, Mr. Jokio, they are high on the agenda, and we do see a lot of companies talking the talk, but not really walking the walk. I mean, there's only 6 companies right here in Europe with that status. Why is that, do you think?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in Metsä Board, we have very ambitious sustainability targets, including 100% fossil-free products and mills by the end of 2030. But also then we have very clear and ambitious targets for energy efficiency, water usage, wood usage, and also for responsible supply chain.
So it's all about targets. Would you agree, Robert van der Kerkhoff?
It's all about targets. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, no, it's definitely all about targets, but it's a little bit more complicated. I think when you're setting the target, you first got to know where are you, where do you start from? And that also means you need to show your weaknesses. And then you got to recognize it's going to be a journey. It's not going to be a one-off project. And once you're on the journey, then you need to continuously make sure that your results, the impacts, the investment you make are really transparent. And that transparency is something I think that maybe some certain CEOs might be a little bit reluctant to disclose because it shows the weaknesses. But once you're committed, once you set those targets, once you get recognized for making the progress you're trying to make, then I think, the confidence is there and you get the recognition it needs.
Mika Jokio, the CEO of Finnish pulp and paper business Metsä Board Corporation, and Robert van der Kerkhoff, a member of the managing board of the Austrian fibre company Lenzing. Thank you so much to you both for joining us. Now, for more on this, who better to speak to than the EU's climate chief himself, Frans Timmermans, the European Commission's executive vice president. I caught up with him to ask him about the progress of the European Green Deal and get his vision for the future of Europe. Now, we all know you at this stage. You're, of course, the face of the European Green Deal. How confident are you that the European Green Deal will deliver an economically competitive and just transformation in the way we live, produce and consume here in Europe?
Pretty confident. There's a lot of leadership, not just in politics, but also in the private sector and among citizens. This is one of the main concerns our citizens have, even in the middle of this pandemic. The climate crisis keeps them busy and they're worried about it. So we have a mandate to act. And there's a lot of willingness to act at the individual level, at the level of society. So I'm pretty confident we can actually accomplish what we set out to do.
And is Europe ready to weather this climate crisis?
Well, I think, I think we're not ready to just let it go. Because if we let it go, the price we will have to pay in terms of human suffering, but also in financial terms, in terms of economic loss, will be huge. As soon as we are aware that the price of non-action is much, much higher than the price of action, we will get the whole of society to move into the right direction. We're not there yet. There's still too many people who think that just staying put is the best option because they think that doesn't cost anything.
And let's talk more about biodiversity and all eyes, of course, on the COP15 taking place and coming, if it takes place. The biggest biodiversity conference in a decade. What should the outcome be?
Well, I think we need to have very, very clear conclusions on how we protect our nature, how we create areas where we let nature recover. To give you one example, if you let parts of our oceans recover, it recovers so fast, fish stocks come back, natural resources are restored. Just leaving it alone, you don't need to do anything else. And so setting parts of our natural environment aside from human activity or from economic activity that exploits the natural environment is going to help nature restore. And this is, I think, something we need to conclude in Kunming.
And I just wanted to ask you about the state of pan-European energy politics. I mean, in the context now, if you look around the last couple of months, net zero doesn't look too likely.
Well, the thing is we're challenged in the short term because of the high energy prices. Now, the absolute wrong conclusion would be to slow down our transition to renewable energy because renewable energy is cheap and we need to speed up our transition to renewable energy. That will bring prices down. Now, any fundamental transition in your energy system is complicated. We've been based on carbon for the last 200 years, and we need to base ourselves on non-carbon now. That is a fundamental transition that's going to be very complicated. But I do maintain the faster we do this, the sooner we can offer affordable energy prices to our citizens. The sooner we wean ourselves of the dependency of fossil fuel, the better it is for our citizens.
Okay, Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President, thank you so much for speaking to us.
My pleasure.
A vision of a much greener Europe there coming from the EU's climate chief, Frans Timmermans. And that pretty much brings us to the end of our show. But before we go, let's bring in once more Maxfield Weiss from CDP Europe and ask him if he's feeling confident after what we've just heard.
You know, today we've heard that our system needs real and systemic change. If we are to be successful, if we limit warming to 1.5 degrees, and if we let nature fully recover, we know we'll be living in a fair world. In CDP, we're going to be right there, driving the progress to a net zero and nature positive economy. It's now for nature or nothing.
Okay, Maxfield Weiss, thank you so much for that. And thank you for watching and for joining us here on Euronews for the CDP Europe Awards 2022. Now for nature.